You know, in politics, sometimes a single powerful claim can just take over. It can totally define an era, right? It shapes how we think, it drives the news for weeks, and it can really divide a nation. So today, we're going to dive into what you might call a masterclass in this very art. It's a modern case study that shows off a really potent and pretty controversial strategy.
So, after a U.S. operation, President Donald Trump came out with this incredibly bold statement. He didn't just say Iran's nuclear program was damaged or set back. Nope, he used the word obliterated. Think about that word. It's a declaration of total, complete, irreversible success, and it was blasted out for the whole world to hear.
But here's where the story gets really interesting. This powerful public statement, it's about to slam right into some conflicting intelligence reports. And in that collision, a huge public debate just explodes. And it brings up some really big questions about truth, perception, and political strategy. Okay, so let's really zero in on this whole Iran incident. It's actually a perfect, bite-sized example of a communication pattern that, as you'll see, goes way beyond just this one event. So just look at how this all played out. First, you get the absolute no doubt about it claim, obliterated. Then, literally just days later, a leaked assessment from the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency comes out, and it paints a much more complicated picture. It says the facilities were damaged, sure, but destroyed? Not even close. So what was the reaction when this got reported? Was it a clarification? Nope. It was a sharp attack on the media for even reporting the leak in the first place. Now, this whole thing with Iran, it wasn't just a one-off moment. It was more like a single piece of a much bigger puzzle. It's part of what really looks like a consistent communication strategy. So let's zoom out a bit and see how this fits into a much larger, recognizable pattern. Wow. I mean, just look at this number. This really shows you the sheer scale of what we're talking about here. According to fact checkers like the Washington Post, this is how many misleading or false claims were documented during his presidency. A number that big, it really suggests this wasn't just about the occasional mistake or misstatement. It points to a pretty consistent approach. And honestly, this pattern didn't just start with the presidency. It goes back decades. We're talking scrutiny over claims about his wealth way back in the 80s, all the way to the birther allegations that questioned Barack Obama's birthplace for years. And it didn't stop after the presidency either. It continued with widespread claims of election fraud, claims that, by the way, led to more than 60 lawsuits, almost all of which were thrown out of court. Okay, so this raises a huge question, right? If a claim is disputed by evidence, why does repeating it over and over again seem to work? Well, the answer might actually be found in a really fascinating bit of psychology. I mean, really think about that for a second. Why would just hearing something again and again make it feel more true, even when you have facts that say it's not? Well, it all taps into how our brains are wired to handle information, and how much we like things that feel familiar. There's actually a name for it, the Illusory Truth Effect. Basically, psychologists have found that the more we hear something, the easier it is for our brain to process it. It feels familiar, it feels fluent, and our brains can mistake that feeling of ease for a signal that what we're hearing is true. The repetition itself almost becomes its own kind of evidence, even if it's not based on fact. And this brings us to the heart of the debate, really. Was all of this a carefully calculated political strategy, or was it just a personality trait, a natural tendency to exaggerate? There are two very different schools of thought on this. So let's break down these two competing views. On one side, supporters will tell you this was an absolutely deliberate and frankly effective strategy. They'd say that by making these huge claims, he was able to challenge a media they saw as biased, totally dominate the news cycle, and basically set the terms of every debate. But on the other side, critics see it very differently. They argue that this approach just completely blurred the line between fact and narrative, and that it created a political climate where what you believed became way more important than what the evidence actually showed. So where does all this leave us? What's the big takeaway? Well, if there's one thing that just about everyone, supporters and critics alike, can agree on, it's that this style of communication has left a huge, lasting, and deeply polarizing mark on our politics. At the end of the day, whether you see him as a disruptive force who broke the old political rules for the better, or as a master of hype who bent reality to his will, there's no denying that Donald Trump is a defining figure of our time. And his communication style, people are still analyzing it, debating it, and feeling its effects years later. And that really leaves us with the big final question, doesn't it? When historians look back on this era of communication, what will they see? Will it be just a blip on the radar, a temporary anomaly? Or will they see it as a permanent fundamental shift in how political stories are told and fought over? Honestly, that's a verdict that history is still writing.